In North Dakota, protests continued during the Thanksgiving holiday as people vent their anger over construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline. Once again, the tactics being used by police at the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation are being called into question. On Sunday night, police used water cannons on demonstrators in freezing temperatures. One woman claims her severe arm injury was the result of a concussion grenade thrown by police. Police say any explosives came from the protesters themselves. Demonstrators also say they were hit by rubber bullets and tear gas. The pipeline would carry crude oil from North Dakota to Illinois, crossing under the Missouri River, the primary source of water for the reservation. The tribe says a leak would poison their water and that construction disrupts their sacred areas. And back with me are Raul Reyes, Eric Bollert, Mark Thompson, and Karine Jean-Pierre. Thank you guys all for coming back. So, Eric, I want to start just with a media question, just to tee this up for a moment. The Washington Post had a headline on Monday talking about this use of water cannons on the Dakota Access protesters. The weather was freezing. It's like 35 degrees there now. It's going to be 23 tonight. It's very cold. Why would something like that not be front page headlines all over the country?
Right. The story has been unfolding for a long time. It's sort of been criminally undercovered for a very long time. So, it was making news during the election cycle, but we've come to the point where, during a campaign, we cover one story. Yeah. I mean, it's literally election coverage 24/7. October, September, November, all these months. So this is obviously an important story, needed to be covered, wasn't. Look, the press does a very bad job. Liberal protesters, progressive protesters, go back to the run-up to the Iraq War. Yep. They were dismissed, set aside, not important. Flip it over, Obama hadn't even filled out his cabinets, and the Tea Party protests began. That was nonstop news. So there's a long-running double standard in terms of how the Beltway press looks at protester based on ideology. And again, this is just a criminally undercovered story.
To say nothing of the protests at the inauguration in 2000, which many Americans don't even know happened.
That's
They don't
right.
even know that there were massive protests against the inauguration of George Bush. You would think it never happened because it never made the media. Right. And, Mark, the thing that is so sort of disturbing about the imagery of it is that you have not only water cannons being turned on peaceful protesters, but back in September, you had dogs being used on them. We're going to show some of this video. This is Democracy Now!'s video to give them credit for it. But you literally have a private security firm sicking dogs on people, on men and women who are protesting peacefully. That doesn't even cause it to be a story. That imagery is so much out of the worst years of when people were fighting for basic civil rights, when African Americans were doing it.
Dogs, water hoses, that's Birmingham 2016. There's no question about it. And, I've had some of the water protectors on my show, and what they've described is absolutely horrifying. Not surprising, though, that it's not being covered, as Eric said, because after all, we still, for whatever reason, celebrate this holiday around a myth.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, around the myth of some type of harmony that existed between the settler colonialists and the Native Americans. And as long as we do that, there won't be a level of appreciation or reverence for what our sisters and brothers who are Native people went through. This is their Thanksgiving, and it's really poignant that this is happening on the very week of what we call Thanksgiving, to see something unfold like Birmingham. Just point of personal privilege. I actually was one of the leaders of the 2000 march against the
so you were there. You know it happened.
And Eric and Raul, it was my only appearance in a major motion picture because I was in Fahrenheit 9/11. Right. Been trying to get back in the movies since then. But and honestly, that's why we may not get coverage this year, but we have to think about doing the same thing in terms of a counter inauguration or people's inauguration against Trump. Unfortunately, these things don't get the coverage that they deserve. And quite frankly, during the time of Birmingham, coverage was not always plentiful. But at least what precisely happened in Birmingham when Dr. King led the Children's Crusade, when the children were attacked, that brought media in. When Selma occurred, ABC cut in to the Battle of Nuremberg, well, Trial of Nuremberg, I should say, and shown that live on television. I'm troubled by what it will take for people to see what this is about. And lastly, let me just say, the water protectors are concerned because I think President Obama has done what he can to hold things up. They're very worried right now about what a Donald Trump will do once he's in office.
They should be. His Attorney General nominee is Jeff Sessions. I want to go to you on this, Karine, because you now work for Move On, which was formed in the era when the press's fixation was the impeachment of one William Jefferson Clinton over a sexual affair, and the sort of hyperactive coverage of which now seems quaint now that we have a guy who talks about grabbing women by their private parts, and it's like, you know, it's Donald Trump. And so the question becomes, does activism have to escalate to such a point that it becomes as shocking as the average statements by the man who will be president? I mean, you have a guy who was invested in this pipeline, Donald Trump. He supposedly dumped his stock, supposedly, according to the Washington Post, in which he took a beating, apparently, in his typical not great businessman fashion. $500 million stock dumped for about 50 grand. Does even having Donald Trump having a personal stake in Dakota Access, does that finally get the media to pay attention?
I hope so, Joy. I mean, look, on all weekends, this is a weekend where we should be thinking about Native Americans, our brothers and sisters, and they are indeed on the front lines of the next fight in our generation, which is water, and just the acts that we're seeing against them is just beyond cruel. It's just inhumane. And in regards to Donald Trump, this is what example 101 of the conflict of interest with with Trump University, and it really continues to feed into that question of will Donald Trump use the presidency to profit, and that's something that we really need to really think about, because that is very concerning if that's the case.
And Raul, you know, and I think I misspoke. He had about a $500,000 to $1 million apparently stake in the pipeline that he dumped for about $50K, supposedly, according to the Washington Post. But I wonder if those questions become more relevant. Donald Trump will appoint the Interior Secretary. Right. He'll appoint the Secretary of the EPA. He could literally change the face of the West, the part of the country that didn't vote for him. Right. He could seize. There's 87% of Nevada is owned by the federal government. The potential destruction to this tribal land, but to tribal land all over the West, is potentially massive.
But you know what is so troubling about this situation is just look at what's happening now, what has been happening, the lack of media attention and the lack of interest, frankly, by the greater American public means that the rights that these Native people have are being disregarded. For example, under federal law governing Native American people, they had the right to be consulted throughout this process, which they were not. There are potential violations of the Clean Water Act. There are potential violations of the National Environmental Protection Act. There are also, if you recall, they had an injunction to stop. They obtained an injunction to stop the pipeline, portions of it, from being built, and the company went ahead anyway. Yeah. And by the way, just in case anyone forgets, this pipeline was originally supposed to go by Bismarck, North Dakota, but it was rerouted because it was perceived, they decided, the analysts decided that it could have been a threat to the water of Bismarck, North Dakota. So now who is it a threat to? But in a sense, this whole situation sums up the marginalization of Native American peoples.
Absolutely.
This is happening. This is real.
Absolutely. Well, we are out of time for this segment, but before we go, we do want to show some video to substantiate Mark. There you are, marching on.
Oh, y'all found that. Oh, my God.
We did. Hey, I've got a great producing team. They are on the case. We are going to also stay on. We will definitely stay on this story of what's going on in North Dakota. I thank you, Raul Reyes and Eric Bollert, Mark Thompson, and Karine Jean-Pierre are sticking around. Thank you, guys. Much more after the break.